It was the year 1513 in Florence, and the Renaissance was at its prime in Italy. In the confines of the city, the philosopher Niccolo Machiavelli had just completed writing his most famous book, The Prince. Within the pages of The Prince, Machiavelli wrote his theories on how to become a great and powerful ruler. One of the most controversial theories of Machiavelli lies in chapter 17, titled On Cruelty and Mercy, and whether it is better to be loved than to be feared, or the contrary.
I reply that one should like to be both feared and loved, but since it is difficult to join them together, it is much safer to be feared than to be loved when one of the two must be lacking.
According to Machiavelli, the reason why a ruler must choose fear over love is because he can establish more authority over his people by being feared. Many scholars would disagree with Machiavelli because the line between being feared and being hated is very thin. So is it better for a ruler to be feared or loved? In this presentation, 6 rulers, 3 who were feared and 3 who were loved, will be analyzed based on their accomplishments, methods of controlling chaos, and overall technique on creating a unified state. By the end of this presentation, one shall see whether it is better for a ruler to be feared or loved. The first emperor of Rome, Caesar Augustus, is famous for establishing the Pax Romana, which resulted in over 200 years in peace in the Roman Empire. In the years preceding his rule, Augustus, then known as Octavian, was a fierce and cruel military leader. But once he became emperor, he realized that being too ambitious might lead to him being overthrown. He was worried that he might suffer the same fate as his great uncle, Julius Caesar. To prevent this from occurring, Octavian devised a plan to win the Senate and the people's support. Octavian returned all the power he was given back to the Senate, and they praised him greatly for this. Slowly, Octavian gained more power as the Senate gave him more awards and praise for his accomplishments. Eventually, the Senate gave Octavian the name Augustus, meaning the illustrious one. In 23 BCE, Augustus began his rule of the Roman Empire when the Senate granted him the title of emperor. Augustus had completely gained the support of the Senate, but now his next job was to gain the support of the people. He did this by establishing games, festivals, and celebrations all throughout the empire. Augustus also did not hoard all his wealth to himself. He willingly gave out a large amount of money to all his civilians and soldiers in the empire. He even had 80 silver statues of himself melted so that he would appear modest. Augustus was neither power-hungry nor selfish. He even wore the same type of toga that was popular among other Roman men at the time. Augustus was fair, selfless, and greatly loved by his people, unlike Caligula, who ruled through madness, greed, and fear. Caligula was the emperor of Rome from 37 to 41 CE. For the first 7 months of his reign, Caligula was loved and admired by the people. He used his wealth to host games and festivals for the people of Rome. Unfortunately, his excessive extravagance exhausted the state's treasury. The empire fell into a financial crisis, and Caligula blamed the people for it. Caligula tried to rule through fear after ruling through love failed for him. He began to extract the people's property, money, and even lives. He frequently argued with the Senate, and he had anyone who was suspected to be a conspirator to be executed. Caligula even went so far to force the people and the senators of Rome to worship him as a god. Even when the people were suffering during this crisis, Caligula still found time to have temples and structures made for his personal pleasure. He was indulged in too much spending and sex, and some historians say he even forced his sisters to make love with him. At times when Caligula attended a game at the Colosseum, he would order a section of the crowd to be thrown into the arena to be eaten by animals for his own amusement. After a few failed attempts, Caligula was eventually assassinated. While Augustus created a foundation that lasted far beyond his grave, Caligula created hatred in the hearts of his people, and that led to his demise as Emperor of Rome. King Henry VIII was the second ruler of the Tudor dynasty in England. Henry used fear to show everyone that he was not a ruler to reckon with. If Henry wanted something, he would go to great lengths to get it. Henry's pursuit to find a male heir to the throne led him to marrying 6 women, all at different times. Out of his 6 wives, 2 were divorced, 2 were beheaded, and 1 died of natural causes. Besides 2 of his wives, Henry had many other people executed because they either challenged or believed to have challenged his authority. He had more nobles beheaded than any other English monarch in history. Henry is also famous for being responsible for the English Reformation, where the Church of England broke off from the Roman Catholic Church. This resulted in 2 major things in Christianity in England. First, the people became Protestant and not Catholic. Second, the king became the head of the Church of England. Although some might say Henry was cruel, he did suppress every rebellion with ease that broke out during his reign. Even though Henry VIII had at least 3 dozen nobles, including friends and family, executed, the fear he created did help him establish his authority in England. Unlike Henry VIII, his daughter, Elizabeth I, was much loved by the people when she became queen. Within the decade after Henry VIII's death, all 3 of his children would become monarchs of England. Henry's first 2 children, Edward VI and Mary, both died without children, meaning Elizabeth would be the heir to the throne. Many disliked Queen Mary because she forced everyone to attend Mass at the Roman Catholic churches. So when Elizabeth became queen, she did not persecute any of her people's religious beliefs, but she was a committed Protestant herself. To appease those who did not believe a woman should become the head of the church, she took on the title of Supreme Governor of the Church of England rather than the Supreme Head as her father had did. Elizabeth also listened to the people's complaints, and she would even change a policy if it was unpopular by the majority. Elizabeth's attitude toward executions is much different than her father's. Elizabeth was devastated when she had to have her cousin, Queen Mary of Scots, executed for being a part of a plot to overthrow her. Elizabeth surprisingly never married during her reign. She had fallen in love with Robert Dudley, a childhood friend, but because he was unpopular among the people, she did not let her feelings be over her obligation to be Queen of England. Some of Queen Elizabeth's many accomplishments include her support on expansion overseas, victory in protecting England from the Spanish fleet, and spread of literacy and arts throughout her kingdom. When Elizabeth first became queen, she ruled a country torn apart by religious differences, but by the time of her death in 1603, England had become one of the most powerful countries in the world. Although both Henry and Elizabeth both kept England unified during their reigns, Elizabeth loved her country more than her own personal desires. The people saw this and strongly supported and loved her throughout her reign. Winston Churchill was appointed Prime Minister of England on May 10th of 1940. England recently declared war on Germany, and the country needed someone who could lead them to victory. And Churchill was their man. He not only led England during World War II, but he also gave hope and a purpose to fight to the people of England. Churchill always told the truth to the people, and although this could discourage others at times, the people knew that they could trust their leader. Although Churchill was anti-communist, he allied with Stalin from the USSR when Germany invaded Russia. With the supplies that Britain gave Stalin, the USSR was able to fend off the Germans. In the later half of the war, the USSR and the United States played a larger role in defeating Germany than England, but Churchill will always be known for establishing hope in all of Great Britain's heart. Even after the war, Churchill was still praised for his great leadership as Prime Minister. Adolf Hitler's rule over Germany started in 1934 when he was appointed the head of state as Führer of the Third Reich. Through his nationalistic and passionate speeches, Hitler gained the people's love and trust. They believed Hitler would restore Germany to its former glory, so they followed him eagerly. But Hitler made many promises to the people that he could not or would not keep. As Hitler's power grew, his true intentions were brought to light. He established a police force, the Gestapo, who had the right to arrest, interrogate, and kill anyone suspected of treason against the Nazi Party. Through the secret police, Hitler struck fear into the hearts of those who loved him. Only a few were brave enough to attempt an assassination of Hitler, but all these conspiracies failed. During World War II, Hitler used propaganda to convince many Germans that fighting in the war would glorify Germany. Those who believed Hitler's lies still admired and trusted him during the war. But the majority of the population saw through the lies Hitler put into propaganda, but they were too afraid to point this out. Hitler was known for being ruthless towards opposition. Hitler also showed great persecution towards certain groups of people, especially the Jews. He made camps where the Jews would be sent to either be forced to work or be killed. This extermination of 6 million Jews due to Hitler's persecution is known as the Holocaust. In Hitler's last testament, he says that what he did was for the people of Germany, yet during his rule many innocent Germans lived in fear. Hitler was intending to make those he persecuted fear him, but he ended up causing the German population to fear him as well. Churchill was loved because he gave hope to his people. Hitler was feared because he gave false hope to his people. Should a ruler choose to be feared or to be loved by his people? Machiavelli is right when he says,
One should like to be both one and the other.
but as one can see by analyzing these 6 rulers, that rarely happens. Some rulers, like Caligula and Hitler, started their reign as being loved by the people, but they later resorted to using fear to rule because of a difficulty that arises during their rule. Other rulers, like Henry VIII, used fear to create unity in their state. The problem with using fear, as Machiavelli suggests, is that there is indeed a thin line between being feared and being hated. Almost every ruler who uses fear to govern his people slips past that line and becomes hated by the people, and it is hatred towards a ruler that causes one to want to rebel against him. If a ruler were to follow all of Machiavelli's guidelines in chapter 17 exactly, that man or woman might be a great respected ruler. He says that a ruler must not touch his citizens' property, woman, or life, unless he has a proper justification if he wants to avoid being hated. But the problem with this is that a majority of rulers who choose fear do not follow Machiavelli's guidelines. Unfortunately, it is human nature to be greedy, rebellious, and envious. So how does a ruler establish authority without being feared by the people? The answer is to be loving towards your people. For it is only through love that a ruler can gain his people's respect, servitude, and obedience without stirring up the emotions of fear, anger, and hatred.